Hello everyone, Robisnow looking at how to get into Liftoff if you're a gamer like me. So I started off life with FPV, literally with a simulator like Liftoff, and using a 360 controller, and let me tell you, it was horrendously difficult, mostly because I didn't know how to get this set up properly, and secondly, I wasn't using Liftoff, which I find Liftoff to be so much nicer, and it just feels right compared to the other sims I was using at the time. So this is a video to get you set up using Liftoff with a 360 controller or an Xbox One controller or a PS4 controller. You just need to adjust your input settings based on what controller you're using, and get you flying in a sort of stable, controlled way that isn't hairy and all over the place. What I would recommend is that if you do enjoy it, then definitely upgrade to a proper radio transmitter. I've got the Taranis X9D Plus, the QX7 is another good one by Taranis. There are plenty of others you can use, it's just that's the stuff I know because that's what I've got. So they've got a lot more control. These things are just a little bit hairy to start with, and the reason being is if we go into the options and go straight into controls, controller presets, this is where you want to go to set this up. First thing you want to do, if you've got Liftoff and you're going to use a controller to fly in it, come straight in here. I'll show you what happens if you don't set this stuff up properly. You want to be flying in mode 2, so now we're in the controller setup. Your left stick up and down should be throttle. Currently that's not right. Left stick on left and right should be yaw, which is actually doing my throttle. Pitch and roll, pitch should be up and down on the right stick, and left stick should be left and right on the right stick should be roll, and all of that's all over the place, and that is because the presets just aren't, it's not picked up the right controller here. If you're not getting any movement when you're moving any of these sticks, just click through, and you should find a controller that works. If you don't, then make sure this is plugged in and restart Liftoff, and that should solve the issue. And you might need to click through these, but we'll worry about that in a moment. I'm going to show you what happens when you select the right preset and leave it as default. So I've selected the Xbox One controller, which works the same for a 360 controller. If you're using a PlayStation controller, make sure you select one of the PlayStation 4 controllers up here. Otherwise, you've got the actual, Taranis modes and Turnigy. So ultimately here, that now is in mode 2. We've got throttle up and down, yaw left and right, pitch up and down, roll left and right. The 0 points are all over the place, and deadband points are sort of on a very default setting, which is horrendous for a controller the age of mine. I'm just going to go into a free flight really quickly and just show you what this flies like. And this is all on a default setting. I'm going to use default drone, so I'm going to go straight into the blueprints and pick a default. I think the Vortex 250 is one of the default ones, so we'll use that for this. But what you'll see is that the default setup for a controller isn't quite ideal. It's just not. It's a bit too hairy, so I'm going to use the Vortex Pro 250 for this. And you'll see that immediately when we load in, that my throttle point is at the center, which means I'm at halfway throttle all the time, and because of that my drone is not armed. Also my right stick, you'll see I've got the stick inputs on screen, but you can see when I let go of that, that's not quite center, so I've let go of that, and on the screen you'll be able to see the right stick isn't quite over the little white dot, which means center, which means when I start flying I'm automatically going to be rolling left. The same with my yaw input, so that's all over the place, and when we do let go it's very fiddly, and I'm not doing anything there, and you can see it's not, I should be able to let go and it holds a heading. It shouldn't be holding a turn or anything like that, it should just hold whatever the throttle I've set at. If I had to set it up on a radio, I'd be able to set the throttle and the pitch, and that would be it. That's all I'm doing, because we are flying in acro mode, and this is horribly hairy. Part of that is to do with the rates, part of that is to do with the controller just not having the right sort of sensitivity dead zones set. So I'm going to jump back to the main menu here, and we're going to just tidy up the controller input here to make it fly a little bit more stable when we're using this. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the throttle 0 point to about 0.3. What that does is it means that I still get a bit of variety, because when these analog sticks are old, so they don't quite stop in the same spot. But what that will do is I'll still have to hold my throttle down to disarm the drone, or arm the drone I should say, and then when I let go I should find a sort of hover point, which just makes it easier to fly. I'm also going to bring these dead bands up, because you'll see when I let go of yaw, this orange bar should be on center. So I'm going to bring that all the way up, and I'm going to give myself a nice big amount of buffer. So now I'm doing the throttle only, my yaw's not really moving, and then when I do yaw, I do get the inputs. So what that does is it makes sure that when I'm not putting any input on yaw, it's always going to be smack bang in the middle. The same with pitch and roll, I'm going to bring those all the way up to 0.2 as well. And these settings just work for me because this controller is old. If you've got a newer controller, your analog sticks might be a bit better. You could probably go with a lower dead band. But personally, what I like out of this setup is I can do pitch and yaw, or throttle I should say, and I don't get any sideways movement. So when I'm doing throttle up and down, I don't really get too much yaw movement. And it's only when I want the yaw movement that it comes in. Same with pitch and roll. I'm doing the pitch and I'm not really getting roll movement unless I want it. I mean, you can increase these further, but the more you go, the more you have to off-center the stick to get a reaction out of the controller input. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to save and exit. Save and exit's on the bottom corner of the screen underneath my face. And we're just going to jump straight back into free flight. And back into straw bale with that default drone, and you should see straight away once I start flying that this just holds its setting a bit nicer. So I'm going to drop down. You can see I'm flying now. I'm not turning, I'm not rolling. That is hovering just nicely off the ground, and I can just put a bit of pitch forwards on and just find the right amount, and it will fly forwards for me. I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to punch the throttle there so we fly over that straw bale, and you can see that flies very smoothly on its own. The only thing that we need to work on is look how little I'm moving those inputs to get sort of somewhat stable flight. It's a bit hairy and it's a bit all over the place still, but it flies. Okay, so definitely get your controller set up so that it's not getting crazy inputs all over the place when you're not doing anything with the sticks. If you're very new to this, then these inputs are going to be horribly fast. So for example, look, full left stick, left, I do a crazy roll. And that's because the rates on these sticks are really high. They're about, I don't know, 1,000 degrees of rotation per second. So if I focus only on roll, I can turn quite a lot. And that's really, really not good to learning. So I'm going to come out of flying for a second, and we're going to just look at the flight controller settings. Now, because I'm using a blueprint drone of the Vortex 250, it's asking me that do I want to copy this drone into my fleet, because I can't change the blueprint. So I'm going to press yes here, and there you can see, look, the rates on roll and pitch are, we've got a max roll per second of 1,167 degrees per second. So just to explain what this means, ignore the PIDs for now. If you use a blueprint drone, the PIDs will work fine. It's only when you start changing the drone itself and the frame that you've used on the blueprint that you're going to have to worry about these. The stock PIDs for all of the drones work quite nicely if you use that frame for the blueprint. So we use the Vortex 250, so this is the default PIDs for that. The rates though, this is what we want to change. We want to adjust this. It will change the curve on this graph, and it will change how fast we roll per second. If we just focus on roll, it should give you an understanding. So I'm going to bring the default rate down to 1, which lowers my max degrees per second to 667 on both pitch and roll. I'm also going to bring down yaw, and I'm going to make all of these the same just so that there's no variation in the sticks. So ideally what that would have done there is the yaw would have been a bit slower than the pitch and roll, but I prefer to have them all the same. I'm also going to change this RC Expo to be 0 on everything, so we can talk about that in a moment. But now we've gone down from our max degrees per second was 1,100 something. Now we're at 667, and you should be able to see if I reset the drone. If I fly high, So it's still a bit fast. In fact, that feels really quick still. There we go. That's a bit slower. It's still a bit fast for a controller, but that's a pretty good rate. You could probably get used to that. So that's just the default inputs. The default rates, we've just lowered it all down, lowered it down from the default rates to slow it down. To get that as a more extreme, exaggerated example, I'm going to take off the super rate. And the super rate basically gets rid of this curve, but it also takes away all of the multiplication on this, and it lowers our default turn to 200 degrees per second. So now we're going to do a turn in, it will take us over a second, because 360 degrees per second would be a whole rotation in 1 second. 200 is going to be a lot slower. So full stick left, you can see that's a lot slower. Now that's good if you're learning, but it's probably a bit too slow. And you can see it's a bit twitchy, and that's because I took the expo off. And what the expo's doing, whilst it is doing, whilst it's adding more rotation per second, it's actually changing how far the stick moves, or how far a stick movement affects how quickly we roll. So that is quite slow. I can probably fly with that. But it's a bit too jarry, because we need like a smoother transition in the middle of the stick, because it's just a bit too sensitive in like from the middle point of the stick's just a bit too quick for me. It's a bit too jolty. So the next thing I would do is I would actually bring the super rate back up to about, I want it to be about 400 degrees per second. So I'm just going to bring this all the way up to 400. And you can see the curve that's adding to this. There we go. So 0.5 works for me. So I'm going to put that on all of them and save that. Now slower rates means you can't do acro stuff very well, so you can't do loads of really fast flips and rolls, but you can see that is quite comfortable. And with that curve on, I've got a lot more sort of sensitivity in the middle, so as if I'm gentle with my movements, it's definitely it gives me a bit more precision in how I fly. So it works, it just takes a bit of getting used to. Now these are not the rates I fly with, because I fly with a Tyrannus, and it's just a lot more user friendly when you're flying, but you would definitely be able to fly with this setup. I tend to find it's just a case of finding rates that work nicely on the 360 controller, and these do sort of work well with me. If you're finding it still too quickly, like turning too quickly, then lower those rates. The other thing you can do is if you find max degrees per second you like, and you're still finding it too sensitive, that's when you can start bringing in this expo. That will keep this rate the same, but what it will do is it will make the middle of the stick input a bit spongier, so you get sort of more, or you get a smaller amount of change in input at the middle of the stick, and it's only when you get to the extremities of the stick that you get more input. So if we do this, now my middle stick is going to be, I'm going to have basically more refined, like very precise movements in the middle, and then when I get to the end it's still going to do that fast 400 degrees, I say fast, 400 degrees per second of rotation. Whoops, we went a bit too high on the throttle there. But there you go. So that's the basics of getting your controller set up and working nicely in Liftoff. If you do want to, do lots of fast acro maneuvers, then you're going to need to change your flight controller settings and get this max expo higher, because high expo means you can do lots. If your expo's at about 1200, then you could do a 3 front flips in a second, for example. So you could do a front flip, a full roll, and a 360-degree spin, all one after the other, and you'd be able to do all that in a second. Now I don't like fast rates, especially as beginner, and especially if you're going to be racing. They just don't work. You need, like, there's too much room for error if you've got really high rates. So bring those rates down, and you'll probably find it be a little bit easier to control. That's why, like, the other thing you can do is you can bring in a throttle curve. So some of the drones have, like, on default, I think the Talon has a curve, something like this. it's stuff to mess about with, but again, all it's doing is it's just changing how much input you're getting. So like with a slight curve like this, you're getting a little bit less input through the middle than you would be with a straight line, and then as you get to the top, it gives you a bit more punch. So that's just the stuff you can mess about with. Something like this works. I'm just going to show you what we've done there though, because if I go to drone selection, remember it created a copy of this blueprint. So if I select this blueprint again, this Vortex Pro 250, I'm going to have the really high rates again. What you need to make sure you do is go into My Fleet and find the one that's been copied. What you can rename this in the workshop. So what I tend to do is, once I've done all of this, I come all the way out of the map mode, and I go back to the main menu, and I go to the workbench. Then I just name the drone. So I go to workbench, name the drone that's in My Fleet. So make sure you go to My Fleet, find the drone. You can see there I've set up a Talon with the 360 controller. And then I just edit this one. This is the Vortex that we copied, and you'll see the rates here are slightly lower than those defaults. We should be at the 400 degrees per second mark. If I edit flight controller settings, there we go, 400 degrees per second. So I press back, and then I'm just going to name this 360 controller, and then that way I know that if I'm using the controller, this is the one I want to set up and use for flying. So if I press save, exit out of that, I will now be able to find that drone really easily for whatever I'm doing with this controller. So that's just one of the things that I found a lot more useful, and it then made me actually able to fly. You can see there we go, 360 controller setup, and there we go. I've got the nice slowed rates, and I find it a little bit easier to fly in in the with a 360 controller as opposed to the full radio setup. So there you go. Hopefully that helps you, and fingers crossed you catch the bug, and then once you're comfortable with this, if you want to increase the rates you can, but hopefully what it will sort of spur you on to do is actually get into the world of FPV flying for real, and then you'll get a proper radio transmitter. I would recommend the Tyrannus because this baby does plug into the PC, and you can just use it straight away in the simulator, and it's just so much nicer, and you get a lot more control out of it. But if you like that video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to see any more sort of videos and tips, I do a lot of track reviews, so if you've got tracks you like and you want to get them some screen time, please leave comments below. Or if you want to see any other videos by me, please leave suggestions. I love that sort of stuff. Alright, thanks for watching guys, and I'll catch you next time. See ya!